right. Well, speaking of mothers, we got one more thing to talk about. We have the mother of all issues has come out of Uncle Dave's publication. His readership has spoken again. They've voted people into the Hall of Fame. And Dave's Hall of Fame at one point, years ago, again, like the man himself, if you read the list of names in the Hall of Fame, you could argue, oh, well, maybe this guy should have been before that guy. But generally, the list of people was a list of wrestlers that you would think, as a long-standing wrestling fan, if you're going to have a Hall of Fame, these guys should be in the thing, right? It wasn't just preposterous. And then he became friends with people. And then as his longtime friends began shying away from reading what he had written for fear of wanting to do a wellness check on him, or just giving up and rolling their eyes, and the younger generation came in, he has shaped their view of who the great wrestlers are, to the point where, was it last year or a year before, the Buckaroos got in the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame. So it can happen to you, folks. It can happen to anybody. But now we're at a situation where pretty much everybody that votes here, he's either shaped their opinion or they still agree with him enough to associate with him. So now things have, over the last few years, have kind of started getting a little screwy in terms of actual real money drawing main event worldwide talent and the individual little niche products that emerge from his world. Brian, did I say that kind of well, where people would understand what's going on?
I think so. I voted for a few years. I stopped voting. This year I didn't get a ballot because I think Dave got the message. I wasn't going to vote again. But one of my issues has been the voting body. And sometimes you could tell that by what group votes for who. And I look at it sometimes and I'm like, you can't tell me that person's a Hall of Famer. And if the same group votes someone who clearly should have been in much lower than that, that doesn't change. That just means they don't know history. It doesn't mean that that person shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, but there's a lot of questionable things. The idea that, Morris Siegel's not in the Hall of Fame. He's on the ballot. So you have to know who Morris Siegel is. Promoter that died in 1967. Yet, the French promoter just got put in. I heard lots of big things about this promotion. Here's one of my friends to do a write-up. He's in the Hall of Fame now. Well, shit. None of Morris Siegel's contemporaries are around. Why isn't he just put in, using him as an example?
Well, Roy Welch is in the same boat.
Yeah.
Any American promoter from the pioneer days that was way more powerful in their wrestling world than almost anybody is today in the modern wrestling world, it's just people don't remember them. They were the promoters. They were behind the scenes, whatever. That's one story, one way to look at it. But there's also, whether you want to talk about current wrestlers or past wrestlers, there are gigantic, major fucking names in the world of wrestling that, because they don't appeal to Dave's viewership or readership or whatever that he's cultivated, they're way down the list. Whereas, somebody that Dave has written about fondly recently is almost an inclusion for you. You get Seth Rollins and Pampiro Firpo on the bottom of the very bottom of a list where Jose Torres almost makes it, because Dave has conveniently written numerous articles about Jose Torres, who was a big draw in the 40s in somewhere. Where was it?
I have not read I'm not sure.
I can't remember either. And I was supposed to be a wrestler, but that's the point. It's ridiculous. Randy Orton is down and getting 30% in a wrestling Hall of Fame that the Buckaroos made easily. You see where this is gone. Again, you can look at the Killer Carl Cox, may not be a wrestling Hall of Famer, but seriously, should he get his ass kicked by Mike Tenay? As much as I love Mike Tenay, this is all over the. Wild Bull Curry is not in the Wrestling Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and I'm one of the people responsible for Wild Bull Curry being put on the ballot originally a few years ago because he was never on the ballot previously, and he wasn't in the first class that Dave anointed Hall of Famers. So he couldn't get in, but like Larry Matisick, I have nothing against him. Like, I don't want to say anything bad about him. I don't want anything I say to be perceived as being bad about him. But he finished higher on this list than a ton of fucking people.
Then Cowboy Bob Ellis.
You know, and that's where it's like, you know, good guy, great guy, good at what he did. Hall of Famer? I don't know. And the people voting for him above other people in that category, that's where I question the voting
because
body.
Dave has, and rightfully so, because he was telling the truth. Dave has said Larry was the right-hand man, booked, announced, etc., which he did all those things, but Dave has mentioned it and brought it up numerous times, as well as saying that Mike Tenay was the smartest guy in the wrestling business, which, again, I'm not arguing at that particular time. I'm not saying for all years in the past 60 years of his life, but I'm not going to argue that point. But does that make Mike Tenay, should he come in 20 spots above the Steiner brothers in a wrestling Hall of Fame?
Should the Hardys get more votes than the Steiners?
Probably not. Probably not. But at least it should be a kind of equivalent, different time periods. But
we've gone through a lot of the names, and I'm sure we'll discuss more of these. We should probably say who did get in this year. The Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame. Here are the votes needed to get in. For the United States and Canada, you need 274 votes. For US and Canada Historical, 243 votes. For Japan, 189 votes. For Mexico, 143 votes. And for the rest of the world, 127 votes. Jim, with the most, just the highest percentage, 170 votes, 78%, Spiros Arion is now a member of the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame.
And you know what? And Dave gives a little rundown on how much money that Spiros Arion drew with Bruno in the Northeast, and Spiros Arion was a draw in Australia. And you could write down Wild Bull Curry's career, and he would have drawn as probably almost as many people. He never got the big run in the Garden with Bruno, or did. No, it was beforehand. But nevertheless.
Well, again, though, Spiros Arion's not getting, you take it into the account that he was a star in the Northeast at a few different points, and then, of course, the big run with Bruno.
Yes.
But he's voted in 170 votes. You need more than that to get in for America Historical. That's the rest of the world. That's Australia.
Well, yes. And that's the point, is that when you've got a guy like Bull Curry, who was a main event star for 40 years and who drew money in tons of places for tons longer and was more influential in the business as a whole, I'm not saying Spiros Arion didn't do dog shit. I'm saying, again, it's just it. And suddenly Arion jumps from 46% last year to 78% this year because Dave said he was one of his favorites. But that's the point I'm making, is that there are 40 names on the list of people that didn't make it in because of this particular voting constituency. that were every bit as big or bigger stars, but have not been presented in as favorable a light in this particular publication. So therefore, everything is somewhat slanted. But Spiros Arian, a great talent, but my God, as I'm looking down again, besides Bob Ellis and the Steiner brothers and Edge and Goldberg and fucking hold on here. Well, Tony Schiavone. I don't know if he should have got in over Schiavone. But
Goldberg and Edge both came in under James Melby. See, that's what I'm talking about.
Well, and Kevin Sullivan is underneath Rossi Ogawa. And Bob Armstrong, the Mongolian Stomper, are underneath all of them. But poor Seth Rollins, the only person he beat was Pampiro Firpo. Are we living in, and Randy Orton down here languishing in obscurity while again, well, talk about who made it, because
let's get back
specifically, there's one name on this list that I'm sorry, it's only for this readership.
We'll go through the list. Spiros Arion, though, if you want to talk about something that's like a holy grail for me, any of the local promos when he turned heel that are not already out there, I would love, because a genuine psychotic. You completely believe this guy's nuts and he could kill Bruno Sammartino. From the little bits I've seen and from what I've heard from fans from back then, it's like nothing else. But back to the list. With 179 votes, which would be 75.2% from his region, Gran Hamada.
And I guess the reason there's an explanation that Gran Hamada never made it was actually off the ballot a time or two because he was in the Japanese section, but he was really a bigger star in Mexico. So he put him in the Mexican section and he won that. Gran Hamada was an insane worker,
really
was
good.
An incredible physical specimen.
Yeah.
Could do all kinds of shit in different styles, could wrestle as well as do pro wrestling spots, as well as do the crossbody. The first Japanese tape that I got where a guy climbed up on a top rope and dove off onto the floor on a guy, which was like, what the fuck? It was Gran Hamada in 1979. Having said that, again, I believe that Uncle Dave has written fondly of his contributions to Lucha Libre and etc. But when you've got the names that we have mentioned that were not only major American stars, and America was the center of the wrestling universe during these periods of time, but also went around the world. And Gran Hamada was, his best spot in Japan was as an underneath guy for Inoki. Because he was also like, what, 5'5"? And he wasn't the genre game changer like Tiger Mask was, because he didn't have the cool gimmick with the costume. And not necessarily, I don't know about his promos because I don't speak Japanese, but he was never featured as a guy that drew money in Japan, and he fit in better in Mexico, but still, he's not really thought of in Mexico by the average person as a Lucha Libre legend. He's just the best Japanese wrestler that ever got over in Mexico. So what the fuck's going on here is what I'm saying.
You know, sometimes if you go back to an era and try to mine it looking for Hall of Famers, if you've already inducted a lot of people, I'm not even saying it's necessarily this, but in general, if you've inducted a lot of people from the era and you're still looking for people from that era, you may have all the clear-cut Hall of Famers in already. Then it becomes almost like a second tier. You see that in baseball with the Hall of Fame. You know, you wonder about a Gran Hamada. You know, you talk about guys from that era. Would he be in the top 5 from that era to go into the Hall of Fame? He hasn't been. So it's, you know, you wonder where it all of a sudden comes from.
Well, where did the next one come from? Dory Dixon.
Out of Mexico.
And I'm not saying that Dory Dixon was actually a star in this country at one time in the early 60s, had a nice run, worked the Northeast, was in the Guard, blah, blah, blah. But he was primarily based for most of his career in Mexico. And it's easier to get in Mexico because it takes less votes. But what you've got now is you've got Dory Dixon, who had, as I said, a nice run for a few years in the States and did, big business in Mexico. But he's in before Randy Orton or Bob Ellis or the Steiner brothers or the Junkyard Dog. Dogs draw back to Dave and his viewers or listeners or readers or voters or whatever. Well, he flamed out so quick. It was only a short period of time. Dog was one of the biggest stars in the entire business at the same amount of time that Dory Dixon was a star in America. And Dog was much more known and influential. And you could say that about a half dozen other people on the goddamn list here or more. He's trying to figure out a way to put these people on a ballot that they'll get in on rather than getting them in. You go ahead.
Well, I guess that's part of what I'm thinking, too. With the Lucha ballot, years ago when I was voting, it was packed. It was packed with big stars from the world of Lucha. And they pretty much all got in. So now there's still a Lucha ballot. And again, I'm not trying to take anything away from Gran Hamada, great wrestler. In the early 90s, he was still great. But, if you've already put all the, Babe Ruth's in already. Ty Cobb is in already. Right? Who was the other second baseman around at that time other than Ty Cobb? You know what I mean? You start looking for, there's still a ballot. The ballot's not going away.
Tony Charles was every bit as good in his own way in the ring as Gran Hamada was. Should Tony Charles be in the Hall of Fame? Probably not.
Well, again, that's Tony Charles, and that's not Tony Charles. It's Gran Hamada and Dory Dixon, who joined Spiros Arion. And we'll get to the other selections in a moment, but I understand, Jim, you have a special message about a great deal for people running their own business.
Well, you know what? Because a lot of these people on this list need to be running their own business because they're out of the wrestling business. Many of them because they're dead. And folks, if you right now are either unemployed or dead and need to run your own business, you'll find that it's hard, especially if you're dead and starting from scratch. You need a help. You need a leg up. You need somebody to embalm you. You need an undertaker to make sure you get up tomorrow. You need Shopify. Well, because Shopify is going to keep right on top of things like that, the sound effects and everything, and they're going to make you money. With that incredibly wimpy sound effect of a cash register, it translate into billions and billions of dollars that you're going to be richer than the royal family of England. As a matter of fact, if you can tap into a way,
it's not.
Well, if you can tap into a way to sell pictures of Andrew with his various whores, then you could potentially blackmail the royal family, including old King Charles Bag Ears, into giving you money to not put those pictures out on the internet.
We don't want to.
Shopify can help you with that.
They cannot help anyone with blackmail. We don't want to encourage blackmail. We encourage you not to commit blackmail. And of course, leave the royal family alone. I'm sure they have security.
Shopify can help you with ready-to-use templates for your website. They can help you build a website that right on the internet that people will love to see, and they'll flock to it. And then they can create email and social media campaigns to get to that website that they've helped you build to showcase the product that you've got, which is pictures of Andrew with his whores. And then you put them up on the website unless the royal family pays you a bunch of money. That's how commerce works in the world.
That's not how commerce works. Certainly not in the UK, and certainly not here in the good old
I heard about the Sun. Over there at the Sun, they just print pictures of people's twats and then just goddamn say, It's not our fault you had a picture of your twat
Listen,
taken.
let's
Get
away from the
folks,
sun.
like you've got
yes.
A marketing team is going to be behind you from Shopify. They're going to be pushing you to take more pictures of people's twats because they want you to conquer the world. And they're your commerce expert. When you want to manage inventory, ship internationally, process returns, and beyond, they know how to do it because they're the commerce platform behind millions of businesses and 10% of all the e-commerce in the United States. They got this thing wrapped up. And they may even already have some pictures of Andrew and his oars. You might not even need to take it. You could just buy some from Shopify. And then
you can't. Shopify themselves are not selling any of these things. Don't say that they're selling it.
Well, they might have some they can loan you. And then you'll be living at Frogmore Cottage. You'll be part of the royal family.
Oh, listen, hop over to a great deal. That's what we were getting to here. Shopify. Of course, we use Shopify for our online store. We have to stress that here. They are serious. We're serious. Shopify all the way.
I'm serious. I'm deadly serial. Turn your big business idea into reality and that sound effect. With Shopify on your side, folks, sign up for your $1 a month trial period right now and start selling today. You'll be screaming and yelling. You'll be selling like an auctioneer, selling like you're being waltzed across Texas. Oh, God, it hurts. Don't do it anymore. At Shopify.com.
No, that's not how it will work, but at Shopify.com, great deals, yes.
Yes, /JCE. Shopify.com/JCE. $1 a month trial period. You give them $1 and you'll start screaming, oh, God, help me.
That's not what you'll do.
You're selling, baby.
You'll be selling. There'll be no screaming. Yes. I don't know why you think we should be telling people they'll be screaming, but you'll be screaming when the sales come in.
Screaming when they're selling.
That's right. Shopify.com.
Yes, you just agreed with me.
Shopify.com/JCE.
Oh, God damn, Jesus Christ, it hurts. Don't stop it, no.
Well, Jim,
speaking of hurting, what other damage did Dave do to the wrestling business? Who else is in this thing?
All right, well, let's go back to the 2025 class of the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame. With 294 votes, the most votes anyone received, and 65.5% of the votes from his region, CM Punk is now a Hall of Famer.
And this one had to just gall Dave because he couldn't, no matter what he did. He tried the poison pen letters and the public slander and all the other stuff, and he tried to sway the people. And even his own crowd still voted Punk into the Hall of Fame that actually doesn't exist. But still, did you see when Dave describes who got in and he starts talking about Punk, he spends 2 sentences talking about Punk's career between ROH and quitting the WWF and going into UFC. 2 sentences, and then a long paragraph about all the problems he caused not wanting to work with Colt Cabana and AEW and how all that whole thing ultimately is his fault, even though other people acted badly as well. He can't get over it. He's still pitching the fucking story. And this is a quote. He was easily the biggest short-term star in AEW, although one could make the case that in the long run, he hurt the promotion. His arrival and first few months were the business peak, and he was the key reason for it, as his return to wrestling after more than 7 years led to AEW's popularity and pay-per-view peak. But the tenure otherwise was a failure, based on an inability to work with Colt Cabana. And then he goes on for another 2 paragraphs and he just couldn't treat Paige right. He agreed not to say bad things about the Buckaroos and Kenny, so he turned his focus to Adam Page. After Page went into business for himself and brought a knife to a gunfight and couldn't outshoot promo CM fucking Punk with his mush mouth fucking oatmeal bullshit. Why? He can't leave this alone, can he? Even his own people voted the guy in, and instead of just saying, okay, he's one of the biggest stars and needle movers of the modern era, and how could you not vote him in the Hall of Fame if he's up for it? He's still got to fucking try to pass this bullshit off so that the Hardley boys don't get pissed at him and don't invite him over to the trampoline. Is that as see-through as it looks to me?
I mean, he wasn't just the biggest short-term star in AEW history. He was the biggest star in AEW history.
Star.
Period. And it didn't have to be short-term. It was because of the conditions that Tony created and allowed to fester. And the fucking ridiculous games. And for everyone who said, let's see how angry Punk gets in WWE, I don't think I've ever seen him as happy as he seems. And it's not just because he's making lots of money.
He's so happy he's killed his gimmick. He's the smiling ice cream man, for fuck's sake.
And I don't think it's just because he's making lots of money. I think he's actually enjoying what he's doing. So it didn't have to go the way it went in AEW. But again, there were lots of games, and he didn't put up with it.
But is this as see-through as it looks to me, to the average viewer, that Dave still cannot leave this alone, and he's still got to push that story, even though it's bullshit, to take up for his buddies?
You know, in Dave's point of view, Punk was in the wrong too. When multiple people stormed in the dressing room and one of them may have lunged at him, that he did anything about it. Surprised he hasn't ripped Larry in the Observer yet. For his
he don't have the balls.
No, but again, biggest star in AEW history. It could have gone on longer. They screwed it up. And you could argue that screw up cost the company more than anything else, because whether you thought Punk was right or wrong, it sent a message about the behavior behind the scenes and about the leadership or lack thereof in the company. That's what everyone noticed.
And I don't think that the Buckaroos have never recovered from that, because the people blamed them and their childishness for Punk being gone. And that's what pretty much started the fact that nobody gives a shit whether they burst into flame or fucking turn blue or not anymore. I mean, their own boringness and smarminess have something to do with it, but they sent Perry away to Never Neverland to make knives and license plates or whatever for a year, because people were pissed at him and his little fucking scrawny neck. Anywho, but Punk made the Hall of Fame, so he can retire happy now. He's in the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame. I wonder if he's throwing a party. Chicago deep dish pizza.
You know, I'll just say, to be consistent, I'm not necessarily a fan of putting him in, or the next person we're about to talk about, or a few years ago.
While they're still active?
Yeah. I'm not saying he isn't. I'm not saying he doesn't have the credentials. I'm just saying he's still maybe not in the middle of his career, but he's having a career resurgence, which I think has only added to his, if not the thing that put him over the top, it's added to his credibility as a Hall of Famer. But he's still in the middle of his career. He's still doing it.
And Dave's, and I can see this, I can actually see the logic in this. Dave's thing is nobody in wrestling ever retires, so we would never be able to vote anybody in the Hall of Fame if we didn't take active wrestlers. So I guess I can say they do have to be active for some period of years, 20 years or whatever the fuck it is. I don't know. But again, this whole thing is flawed anyway, because it is a cross-section of people that he chooses from his readership and social circle. And so even if you're going to have, you need some type of consistency. If you're going to have active wrestlers, Punk got in. Another guy we're going to talk about here in a second got in. But Orton's way down the list, and we've already talked about Gran Hamada and Dory Dixon. So there has to be some kind of consistency when you're talking about major stars that have had similar accomplishments and similar longevities, but one guy doesn't work the style that Dave is a proponent of.
Yeah. or doesn't get along with the right people. And again, with Punk, I'm not saying he's not a Hall of Famer. I just don't like the idea of putting people in while they're actively active, I guess the best way to put it for a wrestler. But it must also...
when they're hyperactive.
Real quick before we move on to the next person, I'll bet you I know the next reclamation project. The next person who's going to have write-ups about their drawing ability and everything else. Jon Moxley's all the way down the list after Roy Welch.
Is he? Wait a minute. Is he on this?
He's after Roy Welch. Roy Welch did better than Jon Moxley amongst this.
Well, as he should, but I didn't even see the fucking name. Where is...
after the Steiners, after Jim Johnston.
Well, see, Roy Welch in my eyes is way too low and Moxley's way too high. So, yeah, he's gonna have to drum up some support for Dick the Boozer, elsewise he's gonna hear all kinds of bad things from Renee Moxley Good.
Well, Jim, the next name to get into the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame for 2025. Again, another name with ties to AEW. Cody Rhodes. 289 votes, 64.4% of the votes from his region.
Well, and to be honest, because Dave's readership and social circle that I mentioned is somewhere, a high percentage are AEW fans or AEW oriented or whatever, and Cody was part of the ground floor of that, so I bet that had more to do with this bunch than Cody being the biggest babyface star in the goddamn world right now. And probably all the people mad that we had Punk too, and these son of bitches ruined it. But with Cody, he's even more of an example of all of these things. He is the biggest wrestling star in the world right now, or one of them, and the lead babyface of the biggest company, and should be in a wrestling Hall of Fame, but he's actually not only active right now, but not even like Punk, didn't even take a long break, is in his first big run and is really in the middle of things. So there is some element of, yes, Cody's a Hall of Famer, but right now he's not even remotely done with his biggest run yet. But at the same time, he deserves it a lot better than some of the people on this list. So if you're going to put active wrestlers in, he would have to be there.
Again, AEW, his role in the start of AEW plays into it. I don't think he really had a Hall of Fame career naturally as Stardust or anything he had done in WWE up to that point. But coming back, looking at it now, you could argue that the peak of WWE's popularity, it felt like, and the peak of the Bloodline storyline was all tied into the Cody Rhodes chase.
The story to finish.
That,
it all tied in perfectly.
It all tied in perfectly, but, that was all centered on Cody and Roman. And that was, has it felt as hot since Cody got the belt? Not to, I hate to say that because you don't want to say take the belt off him for that reason, but it's never been as hot.
Well, and you got to say reclamation project, or renovation or whatever. Cody did a tremendous job. He left AEW television, which even then had more viewers than it has now, but was often a shit show. And he wasn't even the most popular guy with that crowd, and stepped into the WWE and immediately blossomed and became the fucking draw he's become. So he really renovated himself from the glorified indie promotion to the star in the big company. And then he did it just by walking over.
But again, I'm uncomfortable because he's still active. That makes
me and also, I can say a lot of good things about CM Punk, but I'm not going to say that he's in the middle of his first big run, because it's not his first. He's closer to the end than he is the beginning. Cody's in the middle of his first big run. And so that's even more premature, but he deserves it under this criteria.
But that's why I actually think Punk is a stronger candidate than Cody, because look at everything Punk did before he went to AEW, which was his comeback. You could argue he may have been a Hall of Famer already at that point.
Yes. If he had not returned to wrestling, still based on what he did, he would certainly qualify again. If all things were equal and all these people had any sense, he wouldn't be bull curried. He would still be in if he hadn't come back.
Well, Jim, the next name on this list, receiving 288 votes, one less than Cody Rhodes, 64.1% of his region back on the ballot this year, Sabu.
I hate.
Oh no, is this the one you have a problem with? I thought it was Gran Hamada.
Well, no, there's a couple. He got in because he died this year. So that, pretty much it gives a handicap to people that are already dead because they can't die again. I mean, Dave's, again, thrust of the thing is that, well, he wasn't ever a main event guy in a big company. He wasn't really a money drawing talent. He obviously wasn't, world class on promos. His work, let's face it, was awful in relation to actually having a goddamn wrestling match. But because he was so revolutionary with the tables and the etc., that's why he belongs in. That to me is the biggest thing that ought to keep him out, because we still can't get away from the goddamn tables. But I'm not trying to speak ill of him because he just died. But if you're going to talk about a revolutionary, high-flying athlete, okay, Sayama, Tiger Mask, who within the realm of a wrestling ring and the concept of a athletic contest between two people did all the flying with incredible world-class athleticism and precision and the grace and the working ability and the every style from the mat wrestling to the lucha to the blah, blah, blah. Sabu's work was the shits. He hurt himself often. And you've seen umpteen fucking clips of him landing on other people's heads or taking them down in a goddamn train wreck with him. That to me has always been the antithesis of what the wrestling business was supposed to be about. So yes, while he was influential and he meant a lot for ECW and for the indies at the time, unfortunately, the influence has been negative overall because it's been 20 years. We still can't get rid of the fucking tables. But if you look athletically at his work, he's not a Hall of Fame wrestler. Sorry. And he was never a difference maker at the gate anywhere except maybe in ECW, where the difference was if they could stay away from the goddamn bill collector this week. Argue with me and blister me all you want to, but
other than that, a wonderful guy.
I mean, I'm not even saying anything about him personally, but just no, again, Sabu is in a wrestling Hall of Fame with Wild Bull Curry, Cowboy Bob Ellis, Sputnik Monroe, the Steiner brothers, Edge, fucking Ole Anderson, for God's sake, Goldberg, fucking is it Pampiro Firpo, Seth Rollins, the Mongolian Stomper, whatever era you are from. Present your case.
I'm not saying I would have voted for him, but I don't think it's as awful as what you presented there. And yeah, there's a lot of things that came out of ECW that Sabu started and Paul Heyman exploited. Again, he did the tables. Paul Heyman immediately let Public Enemy use tables. And then everyone did tables. It was all over the place. I think for a few years there, he was the most exciting guy, or one of them, in the business. Again, you had to be a fan, even though he got magazine coverage. Whenever he showed up on WWE or WCW, he wasn't necessarily there the next week. It was usually a one and done. But there was a period there, and you could argue, and I think I would, the people that put ECW on the map when Heyman took over from Eddie Gilbert were Sabu and Terry Funk, with a minor for Shane Douglas's promos, which were, for a moment, unique. And I think Sabu played an important role in the 90s in wrestling. Again, most exciting guy. I saw a match with him and Devon Storm for Dennis in 95. Tore the place down. It was great. Again, there may have been 550 people there or whatever it was.
I saw a few of those too, and I also saw him land on a lot of people's heads.
And I saw him land on his head, and I saw him in the ECW arena with a good match, and I saw him in a match with Rob Van Dam where the ring fell apart, and it was a nightmare. So I kind of got to see every side of it. I got to trade tapes for him. I would have to spend more time thinking about if he's a Hall of Famer or not. I mean, you kind of presented the argument to throw him out of heaven more than the fucking Hall of Fame. I'm just
saying. If there weren't other names to compare some of these people to that you go, what the fuck? It would be like, oh, we don't have room for Babe Ruth and we don't have room for Ty Cobb, but here comes Oscar Gamble. See? I know some of these names.
Yeah, and again, there is certainly a bump for when you pass away. I think it helped in the past, and I think Lou Albano should have been in the Hall of Fame, but it helped, I think, Lou Albano in the past. He died, and then he immediately got in. I was a little sad to see that Gorilla Monsoon didn't get in.
Well, here's we haven't even mentioned him.
Great book by Brian Solomon.
But also, Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Ventura and the Junkyard Dog are underneath, that didn't make the Wrestling Hall of Fame, underneath Gran Hamada, Dory Dixon, and Sabu. So help me come to grips with this. It's just...
But there's a great example.
Anyway.
There's a great example for you in terms of the influence of Dave over the voting body. Brian Solomon's book, Irresistible Force, available wherever you find your favorite books. One of the best written biographies of a wrestler ever. Talks about in there that dichotomy, where people like Brian Solomon, people like myself, not necessarily people who were kids like us at that time, even older people, we listened to Gorilla Monsoon with Jesse Ventura on the pay-per-views or with Bobby Heenan on Primetime or on Challenge. We liked him. We enjoyed his commentary. We didn't have a problem with him. The Observer hated him. He was voted worst announcer of the year, like whatever, 6 years in a row or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, when you kind of train your audience to think, this guy's terrible, this guy's the worst, and then that same voting body votes for, like, Tony Schiavone to be in the Hall of Fame, that's the problem.
But this same publication is supposed to be a learned repository and guardian place for all this wrestling history. And okay, so Gorilla Monsoon, who not only was the biggest drawing in-ring heel of the New York territory of the 1960s and pretty much set Vince McMahon Jr.'s company up for success in the early years, but then bought part of the company and was one of the 3 or 4 most powerful men in the wrestling business while still being a superstar wrestler, while still being one of the most highly paid people in the wrestling business for the next 25 years. He can't get in the Hall of Fame, but Gran Hamada, after switching he put a VPN on Gran Hamada and switched his fucking geographic location and got him in the Hall of Fame.
We'll have more about Surfshark next week here on the show. But Jim, one final name, actually 2, I guess I should mention here. I saw it before. Where did Dave write it?
Oh, the French promoter.
The French promoter. I just saw this.
Raul Paoli, named after a city in Indiana, Paoli, Indiana. He just decided to put Raul Paoli of France into the Hall of Fame without anybody voting on him. It's sort of like a fucking executive order here, because somebody has just done an article on how Raul Paoli was the biggest wrestling promoter in France from the 30s to the 50s, and they drew a ton of money.
Did they do more business than Morris Siegel for the same time period, or even longer, because he was actually a successful promoter for a longer period of time?
Well, and I believe now they're saying he was having this fellow, Raul Paoli, it had a couple of years there in the 30s where he drew a couple dozen crowds of over 10,000. So that was wonderful. But that was also 90 years ago. And if you're going by promoters, again, as you mentioned, Morris Siegel and Roy Welch didn't draw any crowds of 10,000, but he drew fucking few hundred crowds a year of 5,000. So,
well, Jim, the final
but
name.
I was about to say another promoter. The last name is kind of a promoter, more a booker, but he fits Dave's profile because he invented Japanese wrestling. Go ahead.
And that is the category he is in, Japanese wrestling, not U.S. and Canada historical. With 197 votes, 62.7% of the voting body, Bobby Bruns finally gets into the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame.
And Bobby Bruns, for everybody going, who? He was a wrestler for years. He also booked for years for Sam Muchnick in St. Louis, and that he was a well thought of wrestling mind in the industry, and he had different connections where he could book talent in different places for different tours or in territories. And in one of those particular adventures, he took wrestlers over to Japan in the early 50s and had the first American style pro wrestling tour, found Ricky Dozan and trained him and gave him a push, made him a star. So once again, nothing shabby about all that, but Bobby Bruns as a behind the scenes talent, as a behind the scenes wrestling personality, Bobby Bruns wasn't shit or nothing, but he wasn't, again, as you mentioned, Morris Siegel, or you mentioned Roy Welch, or you mentioned a few of these other people. He wasn't any more or less successful than they were, except he happened to find the guy and start Japanese wrestling, and that has forever warmed Dave's cockles. So it's not, again, that we're shitting on Bobby Bruns, and that was a very important thing he did, but...
Plus the St. Louis connection.
And the St. Louis connection. But if we're establishing some type of consistency or whatever, it's just, there's none here. It's whoever he's written well about or brought publicity to or lent a favored eye to, especially in the historical categories, because a lot of these people base what they know on history on reading what Dave writes about it. And then there's the punks and the Codys and the people that get in, because if you've got them on a ballot and they're happening right now, they just can't not get in. Even if Dave don't want them to be. So that's where we're at. And Stanley Weston placed higher than Goldberg and Edge.
Well, listen to this. Tony Schiavone with 105
Zane
votes.
Bresloff continues to be on the ballot because he was friends with Dave and gave Dave all the gate numbers. Go ahead.
Here are all the people under Tony Schiavone who had 105 votes, 23.4% for his voting body. He got more votes than Io Sky, Dave Brown, the Hart Foundation, Steamboat and Youngblood, Mad Dog and Butcher Vachon, Hall and Nash, the Iron Sheik, the Samoans, Kevin Sullivan, George Scott, no matter what you think of him, there was a argument at least, and Noki and Sakaguchi as a team, Carl Cox, Zane Bresloff, Bob Caudle, Bob Armstrong, and several. Bill Dundee.
Stomper, Bill Dundee, Sweet Daddy Siki. Sweet Daddy Siki is 20 points below Tony Schiavone. And right up above Mercedes Moon.
there isn't any argument for Tony Schiavone being a Hall of Famer, even if you're a fan of his. So the question becomes, why would anyone vote for him? Who's voting for him? Their ballot should be yanked away.
Well, I bet Tony got probably, how many votes did he get here? 105? And probably half that came from the AEW locker room.
Yeah, you ain't lying. Well, that's the ballot for the 2025 Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame, or the people who got in. Hayabusa and the Junkyard Dog right underneath the cusp of 60% needed for your division. Here's right under that who didn't get in. Hayabusa, Junkyard Dog, June Byers, Jesse Ventura, Jose Torres, Ted Turner, Kevin and Kerry, and David Von Erich. Gorilla Monsoon.
And that's as a tag team now. I think one of these is in individually or more, aren't they?
None of them.
No?
I think that,
what?
Yeah, that's why they're on like this, because none of them are in.
Oh, Christ. Oh, God.
And of course, Zack Sabre Jr.
So Hayabusa and Junkyard Dog almost made it. And of course, Hayabusa and Junkyard Dog comparable in stardom in wrestling. Almost neck and neck there. Can't hardly tell them apart.
Well, if you're on the
Alrighty.
If you're on the cusp, a good thing to do is die. Then you'll get in.
I'm not sure I like the trade-off. I don't know. Can I get in if I just become very sick? We'll figure that out.